What costs are associated to a funeral? Do you have to pay for funeral costs before the funeral? Can you pay for a funeral from the deceased's bank account? What happens if no one can pay for the funeral costs? This is a community legal education presentation about funeral costs. Where to get help from. Point 1. Funerals can be expensive. There are a number of funeral costs, and these may include the following: the cemetery costs, including the burial fees, the funeral director fees, the coffin, the cost of care of the deceased person before the funeral, for example the washing and shrouding of the deceased. If the deceased is to be repatriated to another country, there will be extra costs to embalm and then transport the body. And in certain scenarios, with the agreement of the coroner, the family may opt for a scan as an alternative to an intrusive post-mortem. The above costs can vary considerably. Point 2. Using a funeral director. If you are using a funeral director, it is useful to get more than one quote and compare costs and services. Funeral directors should be able to provide a detailed price list for you to take away. Point 3. Other disbursements. There may be other disbursements, for example, newspaper announcements, flowers, or food before and after the funeral. If you arrange a funeral, you will be responsible for paying the bill. So first check where the money will come from and that there will be enough. Point 4. Some funeral costs require payment before the funeral. If you are paying for the funeral, many funeral directors require payment before probate is granted. Probate is the official proof that a will is valid, so it's important to consider how you would pay for a funeral, whether that amount of money will be readily available, and the various ways the costs can be covered. Point 5. Other ways funeral costs can be paid for. There are other ways the funeral costs can be paid for. 3 are mentioned here: with money from the deceased's estate, by a funeral scheme the deceased was paying into, or their prepaid funeral plan. You'll need to check their paperwork to see if a plan exists. With any payout from a life insurance policy or pension scheme. Point 6. Paying for the funeral from the deceased's banks. When someone passes away and the bank is notified, the bank account will be frozen unless it is a joint account. In some cases, the bank may agree to release funds to pay for funeral costs, although they are not obliged to do this until probate is granted. If they don't release funds, you or the executor of the deceased's will may need to pay and then recover the money from the estate later. Point 7. Help with funeral costs. If you're on a low income and need help to pay for a funeral of a loved one you're arranging, you may be able to get a funeral expenses payment from the social fund. You might have to repay some or all of it from the estate of the person who died. If you don't qualify for funeral expense payment, then you may be able to get a budgeting loan from the social fund. Please speak to the funeral director for information or obtain details from the government website. Point 8. Funerals paid by the local council. If no one is able or willing to arrange and pay for the funeral, the local council, or in some cases the health authority, may do so, but only where the funeral has not already been arranged. The local council may also make a claim on the deceased's estate to pay for the funeral. Thank you for watching.